Hello, in this video we are going to answer this long response question from our practice test. And to help us do this while we're coding, I've actually included it here in a Python file, just at the top. So we're going to write a short program which takes as inputs the user's first name and their two favorite integers. The program should then calculate the sum of the two numbers and find the square root of the total. The program should then output the result, including the user's name in the final output statement. So we want to make sure that we're doing the following in this question, that we're declaring all variables at the top of the program. We're using proper naming conventions, and all outputs must be clear and grammatically correct. So with this program, I'm stressing that we declare variables at the top, not because we have to, just because it helps us set up some things for later on. So I'm going to make a variable called first name, I'm going to put nothing in it, last name, and I'm going to put an empty string in it. And we take two integers, so we're going to say num1, num2. Now again, putting these variables at the top isn't necessary, but it's going to be helpful for some stuff we're doing a little later on. So we need to take an input for the first name and last name, and we need to calculate the sum of the two numbers and find the square root of their total. So we want to maybe make a third variable called answer, and we'll put 0 in. So in Python, to take inputs, we say input. We say fname equals input. We use the input function. We say please input your first name. And then last name, we're going to take an input. We say input. Please input your last name. Now remember, this is called an assignment statement because we're assigning whatever the user inputs into this variable fname. And this is called an assignment statement because we're assigning whatever the user inputs into the lname variable. And this is called the input function. A function is a small section of code that can be called upon by the programmer. And let's just show our line numbers. And now what do we want to do? We want to take the input for two integers, the two favorite integers. So we're going to say num1 equals input integer 1. And now the part that we really want to make sure you understand is that you have to use the int function to cast that num1 into an int. Num2, let's scroll down a bit here, input integer 2, and again we need to cast this into an int using the int function. So a couple good phrases we just want to pull out here. This is called a self-referencing assignment statement because we're actually using the variable that we're planning to store the result in the calculation. So it's called a self-referencing assignment statement. The other important piece that we want to kind of talk about is the idea that this program isn't perfect in that if I run this right now and I put in a word for num1 and I try and cast it with this function, it's going to cause a runtime error because it can't convert a word into a number. We're going to look at how to solve that problem a little later. Now some of you might like to do this as follows. And either form is fine. So in this case we're going to take the input first, then we take the result, we change it to an int and put it in num2. So now that we have the two inputs, we want to find the sum of the two. We want to calculate the sum of the two numbers and find the square root of the total. So we're going to do this in one line, and we're going to say answer is equal to, and to take the square root, we can use the built-in square root function. So that is contained in the math module. So we're going to say import math, and that's going to give us access to all the math functions that are included. Well, some of the math functions that are included in Python. And I just say math dot square, that's square root. And we're going to say num1 plus num2. So this finds the sum of the two integers and then calculates the square root of the result. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to print it out. Thank you for using my program. And I'm just going to use the comma format to output. Pardon me, these are strings, so I can use the plus here. First name, And then we're going to say something like, I don't know. So we're going to cast num1 back to a string so that we can use it in an output. And we're just simply going to say, actually let's put the square root of num1 plus num2 is so it says, so let's just go through this again. We've declared our variables at the top, and we've initialized them with some value. Again, this isn't necessarily needed, but it's a good habit to develop for later programming techniques. We've taken input for their first and last name, which we've done that as strings. We've taken an input for their first favorite integer, and we've casted that to an int, because we know that x is going to be an integer value that we'll have to do some math with. We've taken an input for their second favorite integer, and we've casted it all in the same line. Either technique is fine. We've calculated the sum, and then the square root, and then we've printed out, thank you for using my program, first name, last name. The square root of num1, num2 is the answer. Now just the last little point here, remember that because we convert num1 and num2 into integer values, and because answer is a numerical value, we need to cast it back to a string. We could, if we want, use the comma format, and that would work perfectly fine here as well. You just have to remember that if you actually put numerical values into in the print function using a comma, it actually includes the space for you. So we'll just do this as an alternate down below. So let's give this let's just find our error and give this a run. Oh, I have a brace floating around down there. That was a syntax error. And let's just scroll this up so we can see. All miscue, and let's pick two numbers we know that are going to work. So if we say, for example, 11 is my first one, and 5, so 11 plus 5 should give me 16. There we go. Thank you for using my program, Paul Miscue. The square root of 11 plus 5 is 4. Now an interesting thing here, just as a final kind of closing statement, because the square root is possibly going to be a float value, that's why we get 4.0 here in our output, because Python's going to say, well, the square root is probably going to be a good chance it's a decimal value, so therefore it's going to return that value as a float, and that's why we get the 0.0 there. As always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Have a wonderful day.